everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we're talking about to someone who's had a huge impact on the lives of comic collectors for decades and decades. And it's someone they might not even know had this impact on their life. And I'm talking about Mr. Cliff Biggers. Cliff not only is a comic shop owner, but he's one of the men behind Comic Shop News. Comic Shop News had such a huge impact on fans for years and years and years. Before the internet, before Wizard, before all that, Comic Shop News was the little newspaper you got with your comic books that gave you all the information about upcoming issues, new stories, interviews. It really set the table for so much of what's to come. And Cliff is an awesome, awesome guy. Comic shop owner, comic shop writer, comic shop writer, right? Comic book writer as well. So I think you're going to love this interview. I love talking to him, talking about the industry. So enough of me. Let's get to Cliff, Mr. Cliff Biggers. Mr. Biggers, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
Oh, I love the chance to do so. Thank you for reaching out to me.
No problem. So how did you begin your fandom of comic books?
Okay, my comic book interest began in 1950, early 59. I was having my tonsils taken out, and my parents, back then, you were in the hospital. I was a kid. They wanted to be in the hospital for 3 days. So my parents said, okay, you'll be in the night before and you'll be there for 3 days. You can pick out 4 comic books. My father was a newspaper man, so I'd fallen in love with Sunday comic strips, which I would have dad or mom read to me. And they thought, well, a comic book that would give me entertainment so I wasn't so bored. I was a very wise 5.5, almost 6-year-old kid. I found two 25-cent 80-page comics, a Dennis the Menace and a Little Archie. The other two I found spooky. I thought, wait, it's a ghost. I want to read a comic about a ghost. And the fourth one was the Superman 129, where Superman meets Titano the Super Ape. Because to a kid, it's Superman versus King Kong. I'm on board for that. So those are my 4 books. I still have those 4 books. I have a spinner rack in my office, elsewhere in the house. It's filled with comics, humor, hot rod, war, science fiction, superhero, just like the spinner rack I would have bought. All these are 10 and 12 cent cover price books, but at the very top of each of the 4 sides of the spinner is one of those 4 books, because periodically I just pull it out and read it again.
That's awesome that you were able to hold on to those. That's really you.
That changed my life. A while back, I have not kept up with it the way I should, but about 10 years ago, I started doing a feature on a blog spot post called Life in 4 Colors, in which I talked a little bit about those early years, because I am amazed when I look back at how quickly I went from the guy who just picked up 4 comics to the person who became a comic collector to the person whose closest friendships were related to comics. All my comic book buddies, my friends I found, you would find them at school and you would connect immediately. Oh, you read comics? I read comics. What comics do you read? And suddenly you're spending the night at each other's house, you're trading books, you're going through discussing what you want to see in comics, what's your favorite, what you hate, and lifelong friendships were born that way.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that you said that it was just a variety of comics. Like you said, hot rod comics, the the Harvey tales, all those sort of things, that a real variety of things. Was there ever one that you had to pick up every issue of, or?
Very early on, I became hooked on World's Finest very quickly, because it was Batman Superman team up. It's like, wait, I buy 1 book, I get 2 heroes. This is a great deal. I discovered the Justice League soon after that. Then from an ad in a DC, it was an ad for one of those great Carmen Infantino, Murphy Anderson covers for Mystery in Space with Adam Strange. And he's finding a giant invisible gun being held by apparently an invisible hand, as far as I was concerned as a kid. It's like, I must know more about this man in the red and white suit who flies with the jetpack. I was a science fiction fan as well. That really hooked me. Julie Schwartz worked with his artist to come up with great eye-catching covers, and I was on board for every one of those. My first Marvel comic was a Jack Kirby story where a scientist and some companions travel back into the time of dinosaurs, and suddenly they're trapped in this era where a T-Rex is stalking them and he's warning, hide behind a rock. His brain is small. He won't remember us here for a few moments. I had to read more of this. I was buying Marvel. Soon I'm buying the Marvel pre-hero stuff. And then I see this strange, in the summer of August of 61, I see this strange book. It looks sort of like a Marvel monster book, but it sounds like maybe it's a superhero book too. So Fantastic Four 1 caught my eye. I picked it up. And from that point on, I was a Marvel guy as well. I could not miss them. But I was also loving, I found Steve Ditko's work on Captain Atom before I found his work on Spider-Man. And I didn't realize until a little bit later when my eye got trained enough to spot art styles. Wait, the Captain Atom guy, the Spider-Man guy, they're the same artist. I see it now. But I was hooked on those superhero books. But I continued to buy Little Archie. I loved Dennis the Menace because I could read it in the Sunday comics in my newspaper, and I could buy a comic book of it. And all of those amused me. I was a big fan of the Archie stuff. I was a fan of, I was even picking up Westerns, war books. I'd pick up the occasional Millie the Model. It's like, it says it's a Marvel comic. How can I pass it up?
At what point do you say to yourself, not I want to get into the industry, but I want to sort of learn more about the industry or sort of get involved in some way?
For me, as for many people who, like me, came into comics in the early 60s, that turning point began around late 65. And the pivotal turning point was when Marvel started running those small classified ads in Marvel Comics where you could mail in and you could send Howard Rogoski a stamped self-addressed envelope and get a catalog and back issues for sale. Well, I did that. That got me started collecting. But I also noticed there were ads for things like Alter Ego and, most importantly, Rocket's Blast and Comic Collector magazine, which was, it was part comics fanzine, but mostly an ad zine. Ad for back issues for sale, but also ads for fanzines. This fanzine thing intrigued me. Wait, there are people all over the country like me who love reading about comics and love talking about comics, not just reading the books themselves. They want to read about them and they want to write about them. So I started ordering these fanzines. I was ordering early fanzines featuring early work by people like Jim Starlin, like Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, early Bernie Wrights and stuff. And seeing that work early on and was captivated with it because, and you were so proud when one of these guys broke in as a pro because it's like, it's one of us. He's made it in there. Now he's in the big time. And it was just so exciting. And Marvel made that possible. I don't know if anyone realized that those little ads in there would open up an entire world of comics and fandom to all of us. And I began writing articles and doing artwork for other fanzines in 66. By 68, I discovered Amateur Press Alliances, which is a fanzine network where 35 people get together and they produce 35 copies of their fanzine, mail it to one editor who collates it and then sends back out to each member one copy of all the other members' fanzines. So I was doing that. Kappa Alpha was the comics fanzine at the time. I was in Kappa Alpha. I was joined an app called Myriad, an app called Galaxy. For Southern science fiction fans, there was Southern Fandom Press Alliance, which I joined that. All of these opened my eyes to not only new fanzines, but also new people with shared interests who could turn me on to things I had not read before, both in science fiction and in comics.
So how does Comic Shop News start to come together?
It came about, I had always had this idea that I want to help people find comics they like. When I was 12 years old, I knew every store around us that got comics. And not every store got all the comics. I began to understand the distribution system. And I realized Rome, Georgia, where I grew up, had 2 distributors, and each of them distributed different things in different stores. I learned to make the rounds. So I remember Flash 80-page Giant #1. It was one of those things that a lot of my friends wanted, but we couldn't find it. I finally found the one distributor who had put pretty much all of them in a store, and I immediately bought every copy I could put together with the money I had, and called all my friends when I got home and said, "I've got a copy of it for you. Bring me a quarter to school tomorrow, and I'll bring it to you." Um, that's not a great way to make any money because there's no profit in that. But that began my interest in helping people find the right comics. Then I began doing back issue deals for people. Okay, you need Fantastic Four 17. I know a guy over here needs Fantastic Four 17, but who has it, but he's looking for a Justice League 8. There's a third guy who's a Justice League 8, and I would begin working out deals with friends. And usually in those deals, there'd be a little bit of something in there for me too. I also ended up with maybe I got a Tales to Astonish 23 pre-hero issue or something out of the deal. From there, I went into helping people order comics. When I moved from Rome, Georgia to Marietta, I found a comic store in Smyrna, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And the owner said, "You know comics? I want to carry new comics, but I don't know what to order. Would you help me put together monthly orders? What you think will sell and what won't?" I began doing that. About a year later, a store in Marietta called Dr. Knows, the owner, whose name was Artie Decker, which is also the name of the villain in Zot, Art Decker. But Artie Decker asked me, he said, "I hear you're ordering some stuff for another store. Would you be willing to do that for me as well?" His store was closer to my house. I said, "Yes, I'd love to." And I began doing monthly orders for him. And it was very successful. His audience began to grow quickly. His sales boosted. But then in 1982, Artie called me and said, "I just realized I hate people. I don't ever want to deal with the public again for the rest of my life. So either I'm closing the store or you can buy it from me." He called me on August the 4th. I signed the paperwork to buy the store from him on August the 15th, along with my then partner in the store, Ward Batty. And Ward and I we're in the comics biz. Well, come the second year we're doing the store, we start doing, because the name of the store was Dr. Knows. Artie had started originally as a James Bond collectible store. Week 2, he realized I can't make enough money to pay the rent with James Bond collectibles. So he'd gotten into used books, used records, and then comics. Well, we wanted to do a newsletter. Since the name of the store was Dr. Knows, as in the villain from James Bond's first film, we called our newsletter The Doctor Knows, Knows. And it was we had a mimeograph in my fanzine days, like a Stetner Mimeo and electronic stenciler. We started doing our own newsletter and printing it. About 3 months into it, another store in town, Oxford Comics, the owner said, "I saw a copy of your newsletter from one of your customers. I would like to see if you would sell me that without your name at the top. I would pay you just for the blank. I would put Oxford's name at the top, and we would make copy. We'd handle the printing ourselves." And then 2 other stores contacted me with the same offer. They'd heard that I was doing it for Mike and they wanted to do it for them. Well, Warren and I thought, if we're doing this newsletter eventually we're about almost a dozen stores in Georgia. If we're doing this for about a dozen stores who are willing to pay, what if we could offer stores all over the country a professionally printed product that we could call comic shop news, because you get it at your comic shop. And the whole premise was it's never available by mail. You've got to go into the store to get it, unless your store owner is willing to mail it to you. We don't sell subscriptions. We don't post it online. Everything requires you to make that trip to the comic shop to get your free comic shop news and hopefully find something else to read while you're there. We did a 0 issue in the spring of '87. It was pretty well received. We solicited for a #1 issue to come out 2 months later than that. The orders were solid enough. We began printing. We started printing locally because I was also a high school teacher. I was working with the school newspaper. And so I knew what printer could print a tabloid size newsprint magazine with, at the time, we were doing it in black and white with one spot color on the outer pages only. It was one flat was color, one flat, a spot color, one flat was black and white. Soon we discovered, as numbers went up, that our printer could actually do 4 colors on the one flat, but not on the second flat. So we went to an 8-page newsletter where pages 1, 4, 5, and 8 had 4 colors, full color on it. And then 2, 3, 6, and 7 were black and white. Within a year or so, we outgrew that, and then we had to make the big jump. And our friends and colleagues at DC Comics put us in touch with a company that printed their comics and said, this way, your newsletter can be distributed to Diamond and Capital and other sources the same way the comics are. They pick it up on the same truck line. So we went full color by early 90, and Comic Shop News settled into the format we used up till the day we sold it back in December of last year. And that was 8 pages, full color throughout, printed on a semi-gloss paper, a little bit higher stock than what comics were on at the time, because we wanted to make that art pop as much as possible.
I think there's something you said there that I think is absolutely mind-blowing for you as a comic fan, but DC Comics comes to you and says, hey, let me help you with the printing. Like that had to have been an absolutely incredible moment.
The 80s, the late 80s and early 90s were just such a phenomenal time for comics retailing and for semi-pro publishing. I always call comics a professional fanzine because it reflects my love of comics and my love of news about comics, following on the footsteps of Paul Levitz's The Comics Reader, Don and Maggie Thompson's Newfangles, both of which I subscribed to for years. I wanted to do something like that. When we launched, Don and Maggie were doing The Buyer's Guide, and I had begun writing for The Buyer's Guide in 1982, doing articles about comics retailing and comic sales. I was a little worried. Why? The opposite of anything I was worried about. Don and Maggie encouraged us, said, this is great. We think that you fill a real need that's different than what The Buyer's Guide does. They helped to get the word out. We were there. They were very supportive. And Maggie has always been a big fan of what we did with Comic Shop News, and we always appreciated that. But there were professionals. Carol Kalish at Marvel, an incredible enthusiast of comics, an advocate for comics retailing. Carol was very supportive of Comic Shop News. At DC Comics, Bob Wayne joined DC the same month Comic Shop News 1 came out. Bob, with his background in retailing and his fanzine background, he saw the value that Comic Shop News had to offer, and Bob was very supportive. Patty Jarris, who worked alongside Bob at DC, was one of our big fans and a big advocate for what we did. It was Bob and Patty who helped put us in touch with those printers. And in the mid to late 90s, Bob and Patty even came to us when DC wanted to do a special spotlight issue on Mark Waid's Kingdom, the project that launched out after Kingdom Come. They said, we need to put together a tabloid 8-page color about the Kingdom in the Comic Shop News format. Can you do it for us? We'll pay you, you do this. So they actually called on us to produce special issues for them, not just an issue of Comic Shop News, but a special publication in that format. We appreciated their support, both advertising and the support they gave us in terms of their editorial support. They made writers and artists available to us. They got editors to work with us. It opened a lot of doors for us.
I was gonna say, was it you guys reaching out a lot to get news from them, or were they coming to you and be like, hey, here's something?
Because I've always said that the advantage of Comic Shop News is allowing me to make money being nosy. I always was pestering people for news. The first major comic professional I ever met was Roy Thomas at a New Orleans science fiction convention in 1973. And the reason I met him was that the late George Alec Effinger, science fiction writer who had lived in New Orleans but had moved to New York and become an assistant editor at Marvel for a while, when he packed up and went back home, he accidentally took Roy's Rolodex with him, with all these creators' names and addresses. And Roy said, well, I'm going to be in New Orleans. I need the Rolodex. And George Alec Effinger said, I can't face Roy. I'm embarrassed. Cliff, would you just give this to him? You know what Roy looks like. So when Roy came to the con, I said, I've got your Rolodex. George said, hi. By the way, let me ask you a few questions. And that began a 2-hour conversation about comics. And Roy answered all sorts of questions about things that were going on behind the scenes. A little bit later than that, a friend of mine, Joe Brancatelli, who had been working with Jim Steranko on Comic Scene and later Media Scene, somehow Joe put us in touch with the right people. My first wife, who passed away in 2019 after a stroke, she and I had met through comics. She had a letter of comment in Batman 196. I recognized the return address as a local address. I called every family in the phone book with that last name until finally the fifth one, when I asked for, is Susan there? They said yes. And she probably thought, who is this insane person who's calling me? But we met, we began corresponding and talking, and we got married a few years later. Well, Susan and I had let Jim Steranko know, since he was branching into science fiction, that we had done science fiction fanzines and had received some pretty good support for that from professionals in the industry. So he said, would you be willing to do an interview with Arthur C. Clarke for this new book he's got coming out, A Rendezvous with Rama? And I said, oh, I guess so, sure.
Yeah, twist my arm.
And that helped to open the door to pros. And I discovered that many pros, just like us, are also fans, and they wanted to talk about the comics they knew. Sometimes pros talk too much. Back in the 80s and the 90s, editorial control was a little bit looser. Pros would give away secrets ahead of time, news scoops. It was before the days of non-disclosure agreements from professionals and everything having to be vetted through the publicity department. But it was a great time. I remember at one point saying, one of the fun things about one of the people in comics said, one of the fun and not so fun things about Comic Shop News is I can open an issue and find out about things that we're doing that I didn't know yet. I never knew if he meant he didn't know because they actually weren't under contract, or if the company was so big that the word had gotten out to everybody. But we would get news scoops routinely. We got scoops about the Image change coming on because we had known the guys from Malibu Comics who were handling the production for Image, Dave Oldrich, Tom Mason, people like that. They put us in touch with the Image guys early on. So we're actually, I was amazed to discover there was a Comic Shop News, which was after the first appearance of Spawn, and had the Spawn cover and interview, that sold for several $100s. And Ward and I said, you don't happen to have a case of that lying around? And he was, unfortunately, no, we did not. But it was interesting that the pros were willing to talk to us about these things. So, and they appreciated the value of tapping into that fan enthusiasm.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up that Spawn issue. I saw it's being graded now. It's being so like, but you guys, you were ahead of the curve on it. How exciting was that for you to get that information, firsthand and to share it with other fans?
Oh, because I never quit being a fan of comics. I was incredibly excited about this, to see this whole new, I had been on board for the early days of ElfQuest, the early days of Cerebus, the transition from of Star Reach Comics to something that became a professional quality publication, professional content. I was there in the late 60s when Wally Wood and Bill Pearson launched Wits End magazine, which was truly a professional fanzine. And so I had seen the potential there to see what Pacific Comics was doing in the early 80s, what Capital Comics was doing with Nexus and with Badger, and to watch this growth of the marketplace, and to see that these creators said, we can do this ourselves, we can launch Image. It was just an exciting, it was a giddy time in the comics field. Every week you're trying to find out what's happening new, what's going on next, who's going where, who's doing what. The excitement of First Comics, the excitement of Comico, so many of those companies that they didn't survive in that form, but boy, the impact they had on the industry was just incredible.
And you look at the roster of talent on in those companies, it's absolutely incredible. And not only seasoned people who started their own things, guys like Mike Grell, with John Sable and stuff like that, but younger folks, Ron Lim starting at X Mutants, then going on to Infinity Gauntlet and so many other things.
Isn't it amazing when you look at that and see where they began and how quickly they were able to, through their talent, leverage those smaller publications into a stepping stone for the majors. And then in some cases they did so well with the major publishers, they then had the marketing clout to then go back and do their own book again, which was great. My goal was I would love to see every creator rewarded to the extent they fully deserve for the enjoyment they bring the people that read the books. And I think companies like Image helped to open the door for that, because they also changed the way creators were paid, even at the big companies. They had to compete. If you didn't want to lose all your talent to Image, you had to be able to pay them more. And talent began to make really, truly reap the rewards of what they were producing because of publishers like that. And I think it really changed a lot for the industry.
I want to ask you about some things that happened in the industry while you were working there, and I will start with Image because you just mentioned it. Image, I remember at the time because I was about 13 years old when Image comes out, and I just remember standing online with other comic fans waiting to get Youngblood #1, Wildcats #1, or Spawn, and the excitement of waiting to get your physical hands on it to be part of all this. Do you think the industry will ever have moments like that again?
Unfortunately, I don't know that we're ever going to see that level of excitement. We've seen events that have resonated with similar enthusiasm. The one that I remember most recently was the excitement of DC did it twice. They did it with New 52. When the New 52 books came out, no one knew what to expect. The books were underordered. There was such fan excitement. We had people going from comic shop to comic shop just trying to make sure they could find all the issues. There was just buzz of energy around that. Unfortunately, the books didn't deliver everything the fans had hoped. But then in 2015, with Rebirth, Jeff Johns, Dan Jurgens, Dan DiDio, Jim Lee, working together, they helped to bring together a DC universe that was positive, that was optimistic, that excited fans. We had a tremendous number of people who said in my shop, if it says Rebirth, I want it. I want all of them. The Rebirth trade dress is like a guarantee of quality of story and art that makes this book worth it to me. And I remember we would hear from fans, do more articles in Comic Shop News about the Rebirth stuff because we want to know what's coming up. We're excited again. And until Rebirth officially, that imprimatur went away in, I think, late 2018. And when that Rebirth brand disappeared, so did a lot of that excitement. A lot of people had begun to see it fading a little bit because the story started getting darker again. A lot of our fans were tired. A lot of our readers were tired of grim and gritty. They wanted to get back to the inspirational hero, the noble hero, the Joseph Campbell concept of the iconic hero born and the hero reborn and the trickster hero and the elder hero and the reluctant. They wanted to see it all in comics, and DC tapped into that synergy, and it worked so well. I haven't seen that level of excitement really since then. We've had books that have surprised us by how well they've sold. Probably Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin was a book that surprised everyone by the intensity of support that book gained. And to this day, I am amazed to note that in my comic shop, we sell 10 or 12 copies of that hardcover every month, month in, month out. It remains our #1 seller in collector's edition form. I keep thinking, this will be the month everyone who wanted it has it. No, wait, here comes some more. Come on, we've got more books. And my staff kept thinking, oh, look, Cliff messed up. He typed in 10 for this order instead of 1. Oh, no, I wanted 10 because we need 10 more because we'll sell those the next week or two. But it's to look at that and realize we sold a couple hundred copies. Walking Dead did a pretty good job of tapping into that with the synergy of the TV show and the comics. Robert Kirkman was able to deliver 2 complementary products that had some elements in common, but they weren't going in the same direction. They were each veering off and zigzagging into different paths. And so people who watched the show wanted to read the comics because they didn't go the same way. And I remember times when we had people lining up for the new Walking Dead, but they were also the trades. We just couldn't keep them on the shelves. They were selling so well. But I don't think we will ever see that level of excitement that we saw for the launch of Image or the death of Superman. I don't know if that's ever going to come back. Marvel came close with X-Men 1, the Jim Lee X-Men 1 back in the 90s. Venom #1 was, I remember going through 600 copies of Venom 1 and thinking, how do we go through 600 copies of any comic book? in a suburban store outside the perimeter of Atlanta, Georgia, and yet we did.
Oh, I'm going to jump back a little bit. I want to talk about Crisis and sort of the boom of the crossover with different, same storyline, but it's going through all these different books. Um, how are you? It's sort of another two-part question. I'm going to ask another one soon, but as a comic shop owner and doing comic shop news, all these books are coming out and they're sort of all tied to the same theme. How are you A, ordering it, and B, trying to cover all that's going on?
Well, we had, thankfully back then there were multiple distributors. Um, we still had we were in the fading days of Linwood distribution, but we also had Southern Fantasies, which was handling comics distribution in the South. We had Capital City, we had Diamond. So basically, you were spending a lot of time on the phone trying to find which distributors had more copies of these books where you could get them. And back then, distributors they also were in the game of trying to order for what they thought was going to be hot. So they were trying to keep the hot books in stock. And it wasn't just Crisis. DC had hit a 1, 2, 3 punch. You had The Dark Knight Returns, you had Watchmen, and then as those series were reaching their climax, you had Crisis coming out. You also had, people forget what a juggernaut Camelot 3000 was at that time. The book that really helped to establish, it really established for DC that they could do sophisticated, iconic, legendary storytelling that was more than just their superheroes. And so we had all these books coming out and people wanted them and you were scrambling to get more copies. Over at Marvel, Thor 337 comes out and it sells out so quickly. I am driving to every independent magazine distributor in North Georgia saying, because I knew that their system was such the books wouldn't get to them for another week or so. I'm coming in with cash and saying, I will buy all of these. I know you give the stores 25% off. I'll buy them from you in cash right now at 15% off and you don't have to distribute them at all. And I'm coming back with a couple of hundred copies here and a couple hundred there and selling them as quickly as we could get them. You learn to scramble as a retailer, and that's what we wanted to help retailers with in Comic Shop News. We thought, if there was a way to let readers know ahead of time, here's something big that's coming up, go tell the guy at your comic shop you want it, so he knows ahead of time. Because that was the big problem, the dilemma for comic shops is, if we don't know you want it until after the book has come out and we sell out, then there's going to be this gap where maybe we can get it, maybe we can't. So what we wanted to do was close that gap. Comic Shop News, we had hoped would give retailers a chance to say to customers, here's a newsletter. It tells you about the really hot things coming up in the next month or so. I've still got time to order these for you. And it seems to have worked. A lot of stores said that system worked very well for them. We would always say, and tell them you heard about it in Comic Shop News. They'd say, hey, Comic Shop News had an article about this. Can you get this for me? And that's what we love to hear.
That's awesome. Now the speculation market starts to blow up and get bigger and bigger. Are you being inundated by different publishers, Marvel, DC, about the #1 issues that are coming out to get some press for them?
We are, and unfortunately, what we saw was both the upside of that, the desire to promote the big #1 that they think are going to be good for readers and for speculators. We also saw the downside of that. We saw the people we heard from the people who were saying, we'll give you a special Comic Shop News cover for this book if you promote it as really hot. And it's like, well, we don't sell books under the Comic Shop News imprint. They said, well, so-and-so magazine, now out of business, did. We gave them a special cover and they sold it at conventions. It's like, well, we don't do that. That's not the way we work. Because we have a store and we need stores to support us. If you want to lose a store support real quick, compete with it. Say, I want to sell something you can't have. We never did that, but we heard about it. So we began to see the underbelly of that as well. We began to realize the speculation market is built sometimes on legitimate speculation, but sometimes on market manipulation. We will give you copies of a book. You report this book is hot. Now you've got an exclusive cover you can sell for $20 or $30 a copy. under the table through some other subdivision of your company. And it was a disappointing discovery that publishers and some of the speculator sites were working together to manipulate that market. I'm always excited when we find a good book that people didn't know was there. I hate to find a bad book that is hot because some speculator site said it's going to be hot, and in 90 days it's going to be forgotten. And we were always concerned in Comic Shop News about the variant cover trend, because as I pointed out, a good comic, the curve is an upwards curve. It starts low and it continues to escalate in value because people have heard how good it is and they want to find it and they're going to spend money for it. It's the exact opposite for most variant covers. The peak of the market for most variant covers is the day they come out, and it's a declining price and market every day after that. You can find books like the Steve Ditko cover for Spider-Man 700 from a few years ago. That book was going for $800 to $1,000 when it first came out at some sites. Now you can find copies for $25, $30 in occasional convention overstock sales, because there are still more copies than there are people who want it. And I've always been baffled as to why that cover would be so valuable to some people, when very often the cover was included in the trade paperback later on. It would have the variant covers. If you just want the art, hold off. But we've seen that market manipulation as well. We never wanted to play that variant cover game with Comic Shop News, I guess because I don't love it as a retailer. We sell them, but I would rather have someone buy 5 comics they're going to enjoy than 5 covers for 1 comic.
How did you feel? And I believe it's something that still goes on now, that with the MCU and the DCU sort of dictating the market as well, of speculation that a minor character in some obscure issue might show up on the newest Marvel show, and suddenly everyone's going crazy through the dollar bins to try to find this book.
You play that game constantly, and it's always funny when you have the people who come in as a shop owner. They'll come in and say, "I just wanted a comic to read. Do you happen to have so and so?" And I said, "Oh, you mean the one that the speculator site said was now worth $25? Yeah, we read the same sites, buddy. We it's no longer the dollar box. Sorry." But I understand the excitement. Again, I would rather sell it. If I have a DC regular who wants that book, I'm going to hold it and let him know about it when he comes in, long before I'm going to sell it to a guy I've never seen who's just here for speculation. And because, again, speculation isn't going to make me a lot of money, because that guy's not going to read that book and say, "I want further issues." Whereas if I can sell that book to a reader who loves comics, he may get turned on to the series and come back later. I love reading comics, and I love people who read comics. I want to know that someone's enjoying it. I have a group of friends I go to dinner with every Wednesday night, because Wednesday's the night after the comics go on sale. One of these people, my closest friend, worked for me when I had a second store. He is still basically a part of the store family, and every Wednesday night, it's a group of friends getting together to talk about comic books and science fiction and horror and all the things we're excited about. And it's the enthusiasm's still there. We started going to this restaurant. Gosh, it's been almost 37, almost 38 years now. We've been going to the same restaurant. The manager says, "I remember when I was a little girl and my dad would bring me to the restaurant, and you guys were coming in then, and you're still here every Wednesday night." And we're still having the same fun conversations. And I don't think a Wednesday night goes by that we don't invoke the name of Jack Kirby, because we're all big Kirby fans. And so Kirby, Julia Schwartz, Carmen Infantino, just great memories about these people. And we've had a great chance to talk with them. Because of Comic Shop News, it's opened doors. I got to have multiple conversations with Stan Lee, because we needed to do articles for Comic Shop News about projects Stan was working on. And it was great, because it would have been tough for me to say, "Hey, Stan, I've read a lot of your comics. Can we talk?" Go away, kid, you're bothering me. But it's new with Comic Shop News. It's like, I have a reason to talk. I want to help you sell more comics. And Jack Kirby, Neil Adams, Al Williamson, uh, even people like Mark Hamill. I got to talk to him on the phone in an interview for Black Pearl, a comic he did for, I believe, Dark Horse a while back, many years ago. Um, William Shatner, when they were doing the Tech War comics. The publicist gave me 10 rules you have to follow when you're dealing with Mr. Shatner. Within 2 minutes, William Shatner told me to break all those rules. Like, call me Bill, don't call me Mr. Shatner. And don't you want to talk about Star Trek? Let's talk about Star Trek. That's fine. It's like, oh, I just loved every minute of it. It's always exciting when we have that sort of relationship that Comic Shop News helps open the doors for.
You just dropped some really, really big names there, and I just have to know what's the one, or have there been a few where you just couldn't believe you're actually in conversation with this person?
Uh, Jack Kirby was the most memorable experience. Um, and the reason being was Charles Rutledge, the friend of mine and I, a friend who worked with me and now is part of my Wednesday dinner group, my closest friend in life, my brother by choice, not by blood. Um, he and I were at a convention and we see Jack and Roz and we're trying to talk to them, but we're all there because we wanted to hear a band called Seduction of the Innocent was playing, and we were listening to them and enjoying the music, but we couldn't talk very much. And Charles said, "That's a shame. I'd love to talk with Jack." We walk out a little bit later. There's Jack and Roz sitting at a couch in the hotel lobby. We sit at their feet on the floor, and begin talking with them for 2 hours. Jack is telling us war stories, Marvel Comics history, all sorts of great things. We're having a wonderful time talking to him. Jack, at one point, he looks at me when he found out how long I've been reading comics. He said, "Cliff, what was your favorite issue of Fantastic Four?" And I said, "Without a doubt, Fantastic Four 4, that first appearance of Submariner." I'd never heard of Submariner. When I see a guy in the Bowery with an old Submariner comic, it's like, there were comics with this character before. And Jack looked at me and pointed and said, "Cliff, I drew that book just for you." And I'm thinking, Jack, you didn't know who I was from Adam, but I will never forget that you said that to me. We're talking for 15 more minutes, and suddenly this polyester clad butt is just right in front of my face. And some guy steps between me and Jack and said, "Jack, how are you doing? Good to see you." And Jack Kirby is shaking this guy's hand. And as he does, he stands up and holding the guy's hand and putting his hand on the back of his arm, forces him to turn around so that he's out of the way and he has to acknowledge us. And he says, "I want to introduce you to my good friends, Cliff and Charles. We were just talking about comics. Cliff, Charles, this asshole is Bob Kane. He's always there." Yes, it was Bob Kane who thought, "I don't have to acknowledge fans. I'm a pro. I'm a legend in comics." Jack Kirby forced him to say hello to us and to acknowledge that, because for Jack, our conversation was more important than Bob interrupting. It's like, you don't forget a minute like that for the rest of your life.
That's absolutely incredible. Is there a cover that you guys ran that's one of your favorites?
Um, I would say probably for me, the cover that stands out the most, and this is an odd thing to say. There was a John Byrne cover for OMAC. And what was interesting for me about it was that, I don't know if you remember, but the John Byrne OMAC series was all black and white with black and white covers. DC gave us a color cover of OMAC 1. So I thought, we have a John Byrne cover in color that's never been in color anywhere but on Comic Shop News. It was never in color in any DC solicitation. It was never in color anywhere else. I'm a John Byrne fan from way back. I love John as a writer, as a storyteller. In 1982, before late 82, before we'd ever thought about doing Comic Shop News, a convention in Atlanta had a Jim Shooter roast, and John Byrne and some other people came in for that, and we went to dinner with the whole crew, and we're sitting right next to John Byrne. Charles and I are sitting there. We're talking to John, and the conversation turns to the Larry Niven article, "Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex," about the scientific improbabilities of Superman. And he said, "I've always thought if I could do Superman, And he started rattling off ideas. And we started saying, what about this? What would you do with this? So a few years later, lo and behold, John Byrne gets Superman, and almost everything from that conversation shows up in Superman. And when we launched Comic Shop News, I reached out to John Byrne to do an article right away in one of the early issues. And John remembered our conversation and said, so you're enjoying seeing all that stuff we talked about coming true? And I said, I love it every minute of it. I can't wait to see what you do next. But that was a great moment. So John, having been excited by his work since his earliest days of Doomsday Plus One over at Charlton in the 70s, I was thrilled to see him becoming such a comics icon. And that cover just has always stood out in my mind. It's like, we got a color cover that was only in black and white everywhere else.
When you talk to fans, you talk to other people, and they tell you how much Comic Shop News was part of their life and how it helped them and impacted them. How does that make you feel, knowing that, you know, you started out wanting to help people? That was the goal, knowing that you accomplished your goal.
It is an incredibly rewarding feeling to hear from pros who said, I started reading this as a fan. One of the funny stories to me is we would, for the most part, everything was produced in house. But in the mid '90s, we got a cold submission of an interview with Jerry Ordway, I believe it was, about a Captain Marvel project he'd worked on from a fan who had found him at a convention. He wrote this interview. He sent it in to us. You're writing Comic Shop News, and the month we mailed him a check. And this guy said, wait, they pay for writing? And this guy's name was Jeff Johns. And Jeff has said repeatedly, said, you know, that was the first time I ever got paid for putting words on paper. I decided I liked that a lot. So that got me thinking about how can I get more money to put more words on more paper. So I don't get credit for Jeff's incredible success. But I feel like that little note of thanks he sent me saying, I don't know if you remember, I'm the guy who cold sent you, submitted an article that you ran and paid for, and it changed a lot of things for me. Like, man, you hear that sort of stuff. But to hear from fans who said, you helped me to find books that I loved, you helped introduce me to the joy of comics, you helped me to become a creator because you got me enthused about comics, and you helped me see people doing something other than the superhero books I've been reading. That's always great. It's fun to do that.
Did you ever have aspirations to be a writer, a comic writer?
I wrote, I have, because it's always fun to greatly overstate your contributions in the field. I get people, oh yeah, I collaborated with Isaac Asimov. Well, yeah, sort of. When Techno Comics later changed their name to Big Entertainment, what they did is they bought from various writers concepts and hired other people to do that. One of those concepts was Isaac Asimov's iBots. The second run of the series, Stephen Grant had started it. Stephen had stepped out of that, and he said, I know you know science fiction pretty well. I know that you're very familiar with Asimov and his works. I know you've been reading the comics. If you're interested, I will tell the people at TechNote to at least let you pitch an idea. They said, yeah, make your pitch. I pitched a storyline along with a good friend of mine, Brett Brooks, and we pitched a story in which we created a group of company-owned robots known as the Core Bots, CORPS bots, and the Core Bots were designed to be better than the iBots. They got published. It was the last completed story arc before, unfortunately, Big went out of business, but it was fun having it out there. Even before that, Mark Bagley won the Marvel tryout contest. Mark didn't want to enter the tryout contest. He said, these contests are fixed. Nobody ever really wins. And we had the comic shop, and Mark shopped with us. And I said, Mark, I'm giving you the tryout. I'm not selling it. I'm giving it to you. I will pay the postage. Do this, mail in your artwork. He won. He was the Marvel winner. But Marvel told me it's going to be a few months before we have work for you. Mark and I worked together. I said, you know, I've got a comic idea that I wanted to work on. So it's a post-Holocaust book called After Apocalypse. Mark illustrated that book. I was paying the same rate that Marvel was going to pay him at the time. Another friend of the store, guy just out of high school at the time, said, you know, I'm pretty good at inker. I'd like to try inking Mark's pencils, and maybe you could let me do the art in the backup story too. And I said, sure. And that was Dave Johnson, who's gone on to do Superman Red Sun and then become a major cover illustrator, one of the most impressive cover illustrators in the field. And that was Dave's first published work as well. So it was pretty amazing to get a chance to work with them like that. Dave working with me and with Brett Brooks later on. Dave also, the three of us together did several short stories about a group of characters known as the Earth Boys, characters who were so scurrilous, so unlikable that when they went in an off-world adventure, Earth relocated itself so they couldn't find their way back home. And so they're constantly trying to figure out where the heck did Earth go? They ran away from us. That ran in Dark Horse Presents. We always joke about one of our first Earth Boys was one of the best-selling Dark Horse Presents issues ever. It was, because Sin City premiered in that issue. You don't have to give all the information.
Right.
I've had a chance to write. I've also done, DC offered me a chance to write a text page for one of their DC reprints of Brave and Bold 28, where they wanted someone to talk about the importance of this book. When John Byrne was doing Star Trek comics photo novels, where he was taking screen caps of the series, writing new stories and manipulating the screen caps to serve as the art for photo comics that he was writing, they said, can you do an article about Star Trek photo novels? Because lots of people don't know what these are. And I did. And it was sort of fun I got to talk with John, put together an interview with him about the book, and then also segue from that an article about photo novels overall. And again, talking with pros it's still just as much fun now as it was when I was a kid.
I was going to say it's absolutely incredible of how it started with 4 comic books, which you still have.
Yes.
Then being part of having your own comic shop news, doing your own comics with not just anyone, Mark Bagley, one of the best Spider-Man artists of all time, and having, a legacy.
It's pretty amazing when I think on how much luck has come my way. But the thing that I've always said, between everything I've done, teaching high school, running a comic shop, writing, these were all fun jobs. I never thought of these as chores. These were things that I enjoyed doing. It's to be able to say I've been able to do all this stuff that I really love doing, and it made me happy to be doing it. That's a gift a lot of people don't get. So I felt pretty darn lucky with that.
Well, I want to thank you for the gift for all of us for Comic Shop News. That's been part of our life, and it's.
I'll mention that for those, but while we're no longer doing it, Ward and I sold it in December.
Yep.
That it continues right now, and the publication looks great. The content, they're trying to follow the footstep of what we've been doing with Comic Shop News, and I hope people are still taking a look at it. I'm glad, and that is also a thing that's to me, it's incredibly rewarding to know that I created something that lives on after I'm not doing it. It's like, well, that's pretty rewarding to know that somebody wanted to keep it going. They just said, we don't want this to end with you, we want it to continue.
And we are back, and Cliff is an unsung hero of the comic community. This is a guy who put a lot of hard work into these publications, and these publications have really set the groundwork for wonderful, wonderful things to come. People like myself, what we're doing now, wasn't for people like Comic Shop News getting these interviews, we wouldn't be here. So Cliff, we'd love to have you back. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you from all of us comic fans, and can't wait to see what you're going to do next. So that's all we have for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week. Remember, rate, review, subscribe.